one question that I have for the panelists, one of the things that Carl mentioned was, to do with multilingual. So in other words, making sure that, checking what language it is before actually doing the keywording to make sure you're getting the right keywording. But one of the questions I have for all of you is, how do you deal with multiple different languages? Not in the sense of reading them, but in the sense of, do you keyword differently for different languages, different cultures? So for example, do you just do a table to translate from English into Italian, or do you actually recognize cultural differences? So for example, facial expressions might be interpreted differently by different people and so on. Does anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have an easy answer, though it might not be a good one. We currently support 51 languages, including US English, but most of it is done some kind of a mapping. So it's a simple, very simple keyword by keyword translation. We built for some customers, but for just a few specific languages, more advanced mechanic where we can do some kind of semantic correlation between the keywords in English. So then we can derive semantical translation in the specific languages. And we plan to enroll this for all the languages, but there's some kind of manual knowledge graph-based building effort that we still haven't done. Then for cultural differences, like, that this is called one way in one country and the other, honestly, we haven't done any effort in that, though we have some Asian and Korean customers, and then they were building specific food recognition, for example, for Korean food, but just to that very sparse extent so far.
Anybody else have
well, okay, in Switzerland we have a particular problem because in Switzerland we have 3 languages, German, French, okay. Exactly, there are 4, German, French, Italian and Romansh, but Romansh is very special, and English also. So we have everything handled in 3 or 4 languages. But in the end it's, as you said, a simple mapping we can do, and what we try to do with our search engines is that we translate the search expressions the people enter. The other way is that we translate the index data to a common search language, something like that. But there we have to experiment now a little bit because these all has also influence on the relevancy and also on the content of the search results. So it's not as simple as, well, okay, I have the search query and I translate them in 4 languages and then I find every image that maybe match in the right order. It's not as simple.
What we do out of the box is that we support 14 languages, and indeed, it's mostly based on mapping. It's what we usually do is we're connected to, for example, an ERP, like SAP. So that is a controlled data set that is then mapped against a particular data point. And as depending on the particular user preferred language, that then switches around. In addition to that, we also have sort of a more free-form keyword text field, so that people can enter the content in their preferred language.
Thank you.
One thing I forgotten to say. For our images, the editorial text is very important. So the editorial text that comes in usually in one language only, so in English or in French or in German, in our case. And for the editorial people, they look for images. They don't search for keywords. They search for the caption text in the images. And basically should translate these caption texts into different languages that the search engine, a search result would deliver the right images. So it's not only a keyword mapping.
I think Clarify has a bit smarter translation, but they're not here. So maybe Mike can, I don't know if it's the format. Yeah.
Okay. Question here in the third row.
Schibsted, Norway again. It goes for the Keystone because I'm from a newspaper company actually, and what you see there that is the lifespan of an image takes different forms, you have different stores that it's used for, and how do you actually update the metadata of this image, because it grows, it gets other information that you actually want to put into the keywords.
Well, actually, we don't do that. What we do is periodically rework or update who stories or who topics, and then we want to enrich the data if it is needed, but we don't do that on regular basis. So if we get images, the thing we try to adopt are the caption corrections, but the other things we don't do regularly.
Question here.
Dave Compton from Reuters. We've had a lot of experience with text and identifying entities and issues around that. But when we moved on to the picture side, I'm interested in the Keystone experience with the captions. What we found was where we had different standards of captioning, maybe across geographies and different groups. Firstly, did you find there were areas where there was just not enough content in the caption to identify anything useful? And secondly, where your system was perhaps identifying incorrect entities, is that being used to feed back into the system for learning?
Well, the first question, what we see is that the caption text generally is very short. So the failure rate may be sometimes high. The second one, feedback. Yes, as I mentioned before, the plan we have is that everything Imagine do for us automatically will flow back in our system, and editorial people should check at least in the beginning of the production phase of Imagine what the machine has done, and they should correct the input of the machine, and this corrected information flows back to the machine to continuously machine learning, so that the recognition rate should improve over time. So this is the hope we have.
Thank you. Question over here.
In the early 2010 years, there was a first attempt for a cheap tagging that was crowd tagging, and I recall we had a discussion about that at the Photo Metadata Conference 2012, so 5 years ago, and so it was said there, it was a surprise that the same photo tagged in different regions of the world.
I think you get better from over here.
Yeah. Okay, maybe better. So, tagged in different regions of the world have been tagged primarily in the emotional area quite differently. A known example for that was what does the color of cloth express? So in European and North American regions, black is sorrowing and not good. But white, the same function is white in some other regions of the world. So what is your strategy to solve that? Regional training or something like that?
Yeah, so one thing that I'll answer a bit more broadly on that. I think that generic tagging solutions have a limited scope of use. That's also what we are discussing with Ramzi, I think publicly or here, because for the long tail, you have so many different use cases and applications areas, and what's your expectation, what the solution should return is different. So honestly, I don't believe, I would love to, but I don't believe that there'd be one big solution that would do absolutely anything in terms of tagging. So we still think that it's very important to, depending on the needs of the customers, to build something that is in a way custom. It's not a custom software, but it is a custom training for the purpose of solving the particular solution, of the particular problem. Then of course, if there's a critical mass of a lot of people want to recognize the emotions in Italy, or all the types of coffee cups and coffee packaging that are in Italy, will build that or will include this in a generic solution. But before that, I don't think it's, at least at this stage, humanly possible to define all the different sub cases of triggers of notion of, I don't know, perception that should be identified. At least that's my perception on this.
I completely disagree. No. I think Georgie is fully right. Like the tagging is not, or auto tagging using machine learning, deep learning is not the end all, right? And when you have a hammer, everything is a nail. Semantics are very, very significant, play a really big role, and there's a lot of work that has already gone into things like ontologies and the relationship between words and so on. At the end of the day, it's a business as well. I mean, if for 90% of the world wearing black is someone who's in sorrow or who's just a hipster, then we can label it that way, and we live with that rate of error. But I guess essentially what the model needs to do is recognize that it's black clothes. And if it's that blatantly clear that wearing black in Mexico is celebration, wearing black in Germany is, funeral, then you can actually have those rules on a semantic level, and you don't need to confuse the machine by adding, because the machine doesn't necessarily need to look at location. But if you have that data as well, and that's where the combination of what the user data being provided is, plus what the machine is detecting, plus what the location and other exif data imply.
So I have a question about video. So is video processing really the same thing as image processing, where you just chop up the video into individual scenes, or do you need different kinds of processing, different kinds of metadata? Can any of you comment on that?
I can go briefly from our experience. Yes and no. So in a lot of cases, stock videos are relatively static, meaning the context isn't changing, and labeling something like that is definitely significantly easier, simpler than labeling a feature film. Identifying the evolution of the narrative within the video is something that is a little bit more difficult. But again, for the stock purposes, we launched video and we do that stuff. Simply extracting keyframes and labeling those and doing some statistical work around it in the end is more than enough for the purpose of stock. But the minute the videos get a bit more complex, you definitely need different mechanisms.
Yeah, very briefly seconding Ramsey on that. I think that in general, these technologies, they're about the use case. So it depends how you want to use this thing. So for example, the Amazon recognition use case was that you want to find the politicians in this particular frame. In this case, this is more than enough to do a per frame tagging. If you want to detect more complex things like actions or intention of people or something like that, typically a static frame wouldn't be enough. So I think in current commercial solutions, including ours, when we analyze video, we do it frame by frame. But I think that there's a lot more research, exploration, and advancement. I think Facebook are currently working partially on this to detect intent or more complex actions in video.
A question at the back there, and then
I'm Solveig Vikene from NTB Scanpix in Norway. Is the question to not to Keystone, I think, but to you other guys. Before Keystone came up there, the common thing, or the common image in the presentation was stock images. And I just wonder why hasn't there been more testing or training of real images, real world images data set? Is it technological reasons that you are into that business, or is it the business potential is not good enough?
So from my perspective, our community is like, our main claim is real photography, real imagery. So it's real people taking real photos. You don't have the two old white guys in suits shaking hands in front of a skyscraper as the meaning of business. So all of our imagery is authentic. It's not technically more difficult, or it's just different kind of content. And depending on how you train, you're more suited for labeling a specific kind of imagery or not. So we don't look at it as stock. That's kind of the term in terms of commercial royalty-free photography. But the kind of content coming in is very generic, authentic. People on their phones and their cameras from all over the world.
But I've missed it in the training of editorial images, as they have started in Keystone. So,
Well, I mean, editorial in the sense of news, editorial in the sense of, but that's something slightly different, because typically the fundamental, most relevant aspect of editorial is that there's an event that is happening in most cases, right? And you cannot train a machine on that kind of data. You can detect that there's an event, but you cannot train it on that specific event, because that's happening in real time. So we can detect that there's trends of whatever protests happening somewhere, but unless we look at data that is not from training sets of images, it becomes a bit of a problem. You can detect alpine skiing, a machine can do that. And you can detect a drone, a machine can do that as well. And you can detect that the person is doing it. But to look at a photo and automatically realize that this is that specific skiing competition that is 5 minutes old, that's something a little different.
So briefly on that, actually I was intentionally focusing more on the stock photo use case, because I think to a certain extent this is related to the context of the whole conference that we are currently part of. But honestly, I should share that we were a bit actually disappointed with the adoption of this technology exactly in stock photography. I don't think that this is the biggest market for this, or the biggest adopter of these technologies for stock photography, for some reasons, like people just being used to the contributors providing the tags for these images, comparing this to the standard of a person, and so on, maybe a bit of a traditional industry, not to say conservative industry, in a way. Actually, for us, the strongest use case is in organizing personal photos. So it's not, they're real life photos, but they're not editorial. They're more like the photos that I take with my phone, with my family, or with my friends, or anywhere, or when I'm on a tour, on a sightseeing, stuff like that. So definitely we are not optimized for stock photography only. I think that Ramsey, for example, and I are so much more focused and better in stock photography. I think there's a lot of cases where these technologies can be useful, and stock photography is not at all covering this space.
Well, and editorial images, it's very important for editorial images that the entities are correct, which are extracted, so it doesn't, it's not enough to see, well, there are people on it, and it's not enough to see, well, okay, this image is in Berlin, for example. We have to have the exact information in location, time, people, organization, and also the event. So it doesn't work that it's approximately right, it should be 100% right, because otherwise the editorial information of the image is wrong and it can't be used.
Yeah, I am Fania, and I'm working at the International Committee of the Red Cross. And I'm in charge of the photos, so I'm photo librarian, so I'm quite different from all of you. And so my job is mostly to add keywords to our collections. So I'd like to know how you imagine the evolution of my work, working with you, working with auto-tagging, and what would be the use of people like me with auto-tagging and with the new kind of working.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that I don't think that human will be out of the loop of this process anytime soon. Partially because also what Mike referred to, you have your specific own needs and your domain expertise on how to do this job. So maybe, I don't know, cynically, but you'll be needed at least some period of time so you can input your your feedback in the system, right? Then I think that humans will be needed in the evaluation phase. So still this kind of technologies, they're more for optimization, the speed of the process, rather than eliminating the human component. So I think that it would not necessarily reduce the amount of your work or the need for you there. It might increase the opportunities of what can be done now when this technology is there and you are there. So we think we want to perceive things that way. I think that's the right thing. So you have more opportunities to do more things that wouldn't even be possible, or just the brainstorming about didn't existed before this could be automated.
I always love when people in AI refer to other people as humans. It's kind of always very, the human shall survive. No, I think Georgie has a really good point. We look at it as augmentation. We look at it as, honestly, you shouldn't be sitting there saying dog, 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 dog for 5 hours to say, these are photos of dogs. So we can automate a big chunk of that. And that means you can process way more content. You can add the new stuff that needs to be trained. And at some point, the algorithms will get better. But there's always that point of, the work gets a little bit more creative and a little less mundane. And when we get to the point where the machine can completely replace your job as a human, I think we have way bigger concerns than whether the jobs as photo editors still exist. Because the point a machine is 100% accurate, then we should be running for our lives into the mountains and hiding.
Yeah, just a small thing to add there, because I think you guys are completely right. Recognition is only one part, I think. That's also really something that we get a lot as feedback from our clients, because we see a lot of end users who are also librarians as you are. And I think recognition is one element. A second thing would definitely be quality control, making sure that the things that are recognized or analyzed are actually correct, and also in the right localization and culturally adapted. And then there's the thing more around accessibility, making sure that things are unlocked towards the large user community, because things need to be found and consumed at the right place and time. Thank you.
Are you sold now?
Great. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I'd like to invite you to give our panelists a round of applause.